Okay, so not that it matters because I'm like literally nobody. I'm like one person out of the 30 million that play 14. A person who's part of the striking team on the healer side of things for the healer strike, they actually responded and commented on my video. And I'm sure they probably took my video and put it to like, I'm assuming that there's like some kind of Discord for the healer strike people, and they just found my video and they're compiling a list of it, and then they just found my video and then they gave me all these quick points about how they feel about playing healer. I'm sure that I haven't read this at all yet. I'm sure that they reacted and listened to what I said and then also gave me their opinion on what I said, but also um, gave me their thoughts about how healer is being played in their mind, how it should be played. And I'm assuming as well that they're going to tell me to play healer, but the thing is, like, I do, so it's, you know what I mean. So let's just get that out of the way. Two more points I want to make is that one, I actually never watched that 2 minute video. I like searched it up really quickly, of top being cleared without healers. I actually like went to go check myself, and it was two paladins and a warrior, which I can use that and explain to you why that actually matters. And then secondly, I went to go rewatch my video just to make sure that I pulled some of the points that I made and just to kind of like use it as homework for whatever is being said here by the healer. So, and again, I don't mean any offense or disrespect. The thing is that I just think that the way that you're going about it, calling it like a healing strike. Okay, so here's my first, like, one of my first issues about the whole idea about a healer strike. First and foremost, um, going on strike is something that you're doing to like raise awareness and garner attention and kind of get like a message out to the dev team that you initially meant no offense towards. Okay. Um, However, you're obviously trying to make a point to the team to understand that like healers need some kind of love, right? So I understand that's something that people are looking for. Okay. So we can just put that on the table as well. Additionally, let me also apologize if I offended anybody with regards to the whole like numbers thing and the illegal website that we can't talk about, because the numbers thing is not relevant to me because I don't spew gold. Like I'm like I like blue average, if anything. The thing I was mostly looking for was to just see what content have they cleared. So like if you've cleared an ultimate, if you cleared a savage raid, if you cleared a extreme trial, a criterion, savage criterion, like congratulations. That's not sarcastic either. I'm just, I actually give you massive kudos to doing that because honestly, the content that we have in the game needs to be completed by people so that they can create variety content on other planes and levels that actually enable more opportunities for content to be completed. This is the reason why Dawn Trail is getting so much content because of the lack of what it was there in Endwalker compared to Shadowbringers and Stormblood. We're getting so much content in Dawn Trail, and I think that everyone is eligible to do all the content, whether it's dungeons, deep dungeons, ultimate, savage, etc. Um, and you got to go through it and just go for it. So let's read the points that are made here by the striking healer. Hi, striking healer here. Some quick points. No one is mad at Xeno. He did his job. The run showed that a warrior and no healer playing badly can clear dungeon content faster than with a healer in new content. Okay, so I don't know if I fully explained it in my previous video, but the reason why it's faster to have 3 DPS in one tank versus one tank, 2 DPS, and one healer is not because of the fact that it's a tank, right? The tank actually has less relevancy in comparison. The more important factor is the DPS because if you were to do wall pulls in dungeons, from one wall to another, the objective is for the tank is to pull everything together, kind of use all their mit sparingly or in bursts, right? And then have everything garnered on them so that the 3 DPS can just burn them down before the tank runs out of mitigation, right? That's much less necessary when you have 2 DPS and a healer, right? I mean, the healer will also use their own buttons to do their damage and do their recovery and provide it when necessary to the tank, right? So it's again, it's not the most relevant way to really showcase that a healer's necessity in a dungeon is like lackluster, right? It's just that they again, I said this in my previous video. I said that like if Xenos proves his point, he can prove his point better that healers are kind of a bigger necessity if he did the exact same thing with the exact same DPS that he ran it with, and then did the same thing as Gunbreaker, Dark Knight, and Paladin, and also maintained the same amount of damage and output that he did when he was playing Warrior. I personally think, as a tank player myself, that like that's not as easy to do when you play Dark Knight or Gunbreaker. Paladin is kind of like questionable, but I'm not too sure. I haven't, I've never, I've done polls as well as a Dark Knight Gunbreaker. I haven't done Paladin, but I've done all the other three tanks, and I've had 3 DPS. And burning it, the whole objective is that you burn down the mobs before you run out of cooldowns, and it's easier to do that when you don't have a healer. That's just what it is. So that means that we have 2+ more years of awful healing ahead of us. He played like dog water and did fine. Yes, yes, world first raider, big parts, big penis, ball, whatever. Okay, so I mean, yo, Xenos, talk to them about that. You know, I don't want to. Anyways, so it doesn't matter that he's a world first raider. It doesn't matter that he gets the gold number, being number 4 warrior in the world. Like none of that matters because anybody can do that with practice. Like, yes, Xeno's been playing for 10+ years, and yes, anybody can do it if possible. You just got to do it, right? Now, would it be nicer to have a healer as like a requirement in the thing? I mean, like, sure, right? But the thing is that it people should be more attuned to the idea that he did it with like a dungeon. You like ask him to do that in a criterion, right? And he kind of sort of can't. Him being World First Raider, again, the point I made in the previous video, he's not gonna run. He's not gonna be able to solo tank, and he's not gonna be able to do Savage raids day one, Ultimate raids day one without a healer. He's required to run that composition with healers on his team. That's just the way that it works. I mean, like a dungeon is a dungeon. Like, you know, now I guess you can argue to a degree that like, you know, content wise in comparison difficulty, if there's a mechanic that a boss or a mob has that has to be performed by a healer that cannot be performed by a tank or a DPS that makes it a healer requirement, then you can argue that to become a mechanical function in a dungeon in order to be able to make the healer required. However, that's not the reason why the strike exists in the first place, right? People have said that the rotation is dull because you only have 2 buttons of damage, which I'm playing. I mean, I'm gonna pull out my. I'll go through all 4 tank or all 4 healers right now, right? So like right now, what I've got Holy, which is good for AoE. I've got Afflatus Misery. You've got Assize. You've got Glare. You've got Dia, right? So if you count those numbers, you've got 5 attacks on a white mage, right? If you go through it with Astro, you've got Earthly Star, Macrocosmos. You've got Lord of the Crowns if you get it, Combust, Gravity, and then Fall Malefic. And then if you go through with Scholar, you've got Broil, Biolysis, Energy Drain, right, and then Art of War, which is 1 less. You've got Ruin 2, but in a theoretical, like you're never using Ruin 2 unless you absolutely need to, but like it's never usually used. And then for Sage, you've got Pneuma, Phlegma, Toxicon, Dosis, and Eucrasion Dosis, and you got Dyscrasia. So you got 6 attacks, right? So people are only really using 1 and 2, and then the occasional 3 and 4, right? That's just the way that the game kind of has that functionality come into perspective when you're playing as healer. Now, I think the issue is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the problem is that healers have been wanting changes since, I guess, Shadowbringers, because they took out abilities. Because Stormblood had role abilities that you can implement as like a healer. You know, we had like Protect back then. We had Cleric Stance. You know, all those things where you kind of had alternate ways of pressing buttons and doing stuff. And I guess the problem is that they want to press more than just like 1 and 2, right? Which is like you're spamming your 1 single target spell and then your dot, right? I guess there's a issue with that. Now here's the thing. In Dawntrail, we're getting new buttons. Like with Presence of Mind on White Mage, you get Glare 4 or 5 or whatever the one's gonna be called, or like Super Glare, whatever the name is called, right? Sage has an AoE dot. Scholar has the super chain dot thing that's like insanely cracked, and then Astro has whatever the button that they're getting with the Oracle thing. Right, so they're all getting another new button, but the problem is that those are still buttons that you're going to press only every 2 minutes and not every 60 seconds or 30 seconds or every other minute, right? Or second rather, right? So I guess the issue is that healers would like to press more than just 1 1 1 1 1 2, right, and then repeat until from start to finish while pressing all their healing buttons in between. I think the ideal case scenario is that since a lot of jobs in this game have combos or have a priority system in how they apply their damage, which is what healers have, they want something that's just more than spamming one spell for primary damage and then a dot on the occasion, which is a fair argument, and I can understand that. The problem though is that all the healers, all of their gauge, like their, whether it's the lily gauge or the card gauge or the ether pack gauge, right, or the toxicon gauge for sage, like they're all used for defensive resources, right? Same way how like with tanks, Paladin is the only tank that has the meter that they use for, in a defensive measure, while the other three tanks are all used offensively. So I guess if there's a change that you would want in this game as a healer, is to have healers have their gauge, like their unique special gauge, be used in an offensive measure. Which the only healer that technically has that is Sage and White Mage. So if there was a combo system that you can implement, I guess that would be something that's like a step in the right direction. Like, right, I don't know. Or if you look at the PvP system that they have for the healers press a lot more buttons and have a lot more damage. But that's the point though, because they kind of embed their attack buttons with their healer buttons. They're kind of combined. But that makes it much more restrictive in terms of how you're going to actually utilize your heals versus your DPS. In PvP, it's deliberately designed to just do insane burst damage across the board for every job, and there's no requirement in what you play and bring to like competitive PvP. You can play literally whatever you want. Everything is viable. There's no bad like PvP play like job wise, right? The thing is that if you incorporate that in a PvE scenario, that's not going to be good, because buttons that are going to be designed to do damage will always be designed to use damage and never used for the mitigation or the healing purpose. A really easy example of this is with is Numa as well as a size for White Mage, because you use Numa when you just need to heal and it does the same damage as Dosis. A size is actually a better example, because with a size, you never use it for the heal. It's never been used for the heal. It's only been used for the damage. That's just how it's always been. Um, so, anyways, I think the issue is that people just want to be able to press a lot of more attack buttons, maybe in comparison to just pressing all the healing buttons. So I definitely went off tangent on there, but it's okay. Um, so Xenos being the person who did it, if anybody did it besides him, the result would have been the same. Basically, if anybody on that media tour did the same thing that Xenos did, it probably would have garnered the same amount of attention. So him being the person who did it, it doesn't matter. If I was on the media tour, I wish, and I did it, then right, people might get mad at me for doing it. Like, it is what it is. But again, there's a very big difference between doing content in a dungeon versus an extreme trial versus a ultimate versus an alliance raid, all that stuff. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to keep in mind that like we don't really know how the state of the game is going to be until we actually get our hands on it in Dawntrail. The only person who had that experience were the people who were in the media tour. That's then, and their primary focus was to cover all the job changes, because that was the biggest eye-opening thing that people were paying attention to. Okay, so in that particular run, manual cooking abilities and eating bones for lunch, and it was still faster than just taking a healer normally. Which, yes, because 3 DPS does more damage than 2 DPS and a healer. Healers will never do more damage than DPS. That logically makes no sense, right? But again, it's not because the tank isn't the issue in that run. The problem is that you had 3 DPS, and that's literally what it was. Like, tanks having a lot of mitigation is actually more scary than you realize, for the reason that we'll talk about in a little bit. But again, I just want to reemphasize that, like, because it was 3 DPS in one tank, that's the bigger issue versus having 2 DPS and a healer. This is a design issue because it shows healers are irrelevant even in content that has not come out yet, which we've already covered. Healers have been asking for changes since the beginning of Shadowbringers, where they gutted every healer's kit massively and left it with 1 DPS button, 1 dot, and 1 AoE, which I just literally proved that that's not the case scenario. There are buttons that either do extra damage in some case scenarios, or there are buttons that compensate to kind of mix in. So, like, for example, like Toxicon versus Dosis in a single target scenario is equal, but in a 2 target scenario, Toxicon's better than Dosis, right? But like, when do you ever have a 2-person scenario outside of dungeons, right? Like in trials and raids, right? Like, it's kind of rare. So I understand that they only like have dosis, Eucrasian dosis, and you know, but and dyscrasia, right? But the thing is, like, there's more buttons than that on an offensive case. Every healer has, I think, on average, it's like 5 buttons of damage to do. I think the problem is like it's a GCD issue. They want more than just 3 GCDs to press, which we're getting. We're getting another, like, they're all getting one more GCD. They're gonna have 2 DPS buttons. Sage has 2 dots, and Sage has 2 AoEs, and so does every healer has like 2 or 3 AoEs. So I think it's even more than that now that I think about it. So that's up there. We've been in Nerf for around 5 years now. The strike may seem stupid, but it got us heard. Being polite and discussing things in the correct channels only got us ignored. See, but okay, so I don't agree with that because okay, I did say that the strike is stupid, and I still feel that way today. Maybe stupid is a very harsh word to use, so I apologize if it seems very straightforward and blunt, but that's just kind of what it is. The reason why it seems stupid is not because it's a strike that's like affecting the game. It's a strike that's affecting the players. So like I don't want to create like a crazy example, but like if my friend who's never played 14 knows that I play healer and I hate healer, I don't, but like if I did, and they ask me, oh, like, how do you feel about playing healer? And I told them that I didn't like it, then I discourage them from wanting to play healer, which actually only exacerbates the problem in comparison to somebody who actually likes playing healer and encourages them to do it. Now, obviously, the issue with the strike is that they feel that they've been ignored, and I would actually want to know, like, if you can respond to me here, right? What do you want to see in Dawntrail as a healer? Do you want combo buttons when it comes to doing your damage? Do you want more DPS buttons in general that don't just stem from one DPS button, 1.1 AoE? Like, do you want 2 DPS buttons? Do you need like a scenario? Like, I would like to understand what is it that's necessary for this strike to, like, what yield a success for the strike is my question. I personally don't know, right? I personally think, like I said in my other video too, like I feel like healers are in a good place. Maybe because of how I feel about how they function in the higher level ended content, which, like I said before, healers are a 100% requirement in standard composition when you're doing savage raids, normal raids, well, less normal raids, but savage raids and ultimates and criterion. It's a requirement that healers are in the game. So, and like I said, like healers actually don't spend a lot of time pressing DPS buttons to keep the team alive during ultimates and savage runs. They don't. They actually sit there a lot, and when day one comes out for the savage raids and ultimates, they're literally going to be spending more time doing healing versus doing damage. But as your gear kind of compensates, that's going to start shifting a little bit, especially as you get more comfortable with the healer that you're playing. Healers are also told by HP to just go play ultimate, and then top was clear on patch with no healers, which makes us even more irrelevant. Okay. So I went, like I said, I went back. I actually went to go look at the video. Okay, I actually have it right here. So as you're gonna see, okay, they ran it with 2 paladins, a warrior, summoner, monk, reaper, dancer, red mage. Now, all of these healers, or sorry, apologies, all these jobs that you have in this composition, they all have some form of mitigation that's necessary just enough that they didn't need a healer. Okay, now here's the issue with this too. I previously said that it was 4 tanks and 4 DPS, so they would have had 4 invulnerabilities, and they had a paladin and a warrior doing stuff. I was actually incorrect. They have 5 DPS, which is actually worse because 5 DPS covers ground for a healer and a tank in terms of damage. So them having 5 DPS is actually worse than having 4 DPS and 4 tanks. They have 3 tanks, and 2 of those tanks are paladins. And during downtime, because they can just cast Clemency for free, that's exactly what they did in top. The monk was necessary to use because of mantra, literally mantra. Summoner has Phoenix with the summon for the AoE heal. You have the occasional Radiant Aegis, right? But that's mostly what it was for. It was for the Phoenix heal. Reaper has Arcane Crest, which is that shield that breaks into the regen. Dancer has Tactician, Improvisation, which is the regen and the shield, and Curing Waltz, which they just use that of like, if you dance partner, like the monk, and you have all 8 players stacked together, that's a double heal that has good potency for the dancer. That's a very intelligent play for self sustainability. Now, you're going to argue that no, that's exactly the reason why healers are becoming more irrelevant, but that's not how that works, because you're never going to see that run in a party finder scenario. Party finder always will require 2 tanks of any kind, 2 healers of any kind, maybe less so white mage and Astro, but just you're getting 2 healers and 4 DPS. We don't I only raid in party finder, and I've never seen them ever attempt, even as like a joke, to try and do that composition. Never. Right. And then with red mage, you have barrier, which is mitigation, and also they cast for cure. So the primary function for this composition in this run for Omega Protocol is that they do stuff during downtime. And again, at the same time, you have 3 invulns. It doesn't matter which invulns you have. The thing is that you just have an extra invuln. There's going to be mechanics that you can easily just take advantage of by simply having a third invulnerability. That's just the way that that's going to work. Um, and the mitigation that comes into play with this as well, like there's literally going to be an opportunity where attacks are going to go off, and there's just a tank that has a free use to give mitigation to whomever is squishiest. That's just literally the way that it's going to work. And again, the damage will kind of make up for it too, because one DPS having a 5th spot in that composition literally does more damage than the combination of like what 2 healers would do and a tank. So the fact that they have 5 DPS, it makes sense why they would actually burn through the fight so quickly. But again, you're never going to see that ever again. Like, you're just not. Okay. So because top was cleared on patch with no healers does not mean that healers are irrelevant. Because if that was the case scenario, Party Finder would never actually allow, they would ban healers. They would force, Party Finder would force people to play the 3 composition tank and 5 DPS run. They would never incorporate healers. But guess what? They don't do that. So that's not possible. Healers are required, like I've said since the beginning of time. There are no 0 tank clears of ultimate content or 0 DPS clears, which we know this is not true because literally tank cob is a thing. There was a run that they cleared 8. I said that in the other video too. They cleared 8 tanks. They cleared UCOB, right? It's impossible to I went back to go do the homework as well. It's impossible. Okay, it's impossible to do Ubu with 8 tanks. You can't. It's unclearable. It's impossible to do it with, you can't do 8 tanks. You can't do 8 DPS in Ubu, T, DSR, or top. It's literally impossible. Because it's either there's a healer check mechanic that's required to be performed by healers. With Ubu, you get the LB during transition. With T, you got the debuff that you get at the end of phase 1. With DSR, just you got Orshafon, and then with top, the issue is actually more so damage than it is the fact that there's 8 tanks. Like, damage will never actually be enough in top with 8 tanks. And DPS is impossible to do with 8 DPS because despite having 8 DPS, there's mechanics that have to be performed that require healing and sustainability. And despite healers not being used in top for that 3-5 clear, if you had 8 DPS in top, they're dying to everything in the first phase for every fight because autos and tank busters practically one-shot everything DPS wise. I mean, they might survive something, but they're still going to eat it later, and they're just going to die. You can't even have like 6 red mages and 2 melees or something raising a whole time. They're going to eventually run out of MP, and then they will end up dying, and then it's going to completely snowball. So yes, there's no DPS clears in terms of ultimates. There never will be because mechanically it's impossible. That even goes, you can even apply that logic to trials and normal raids. You actually can do it in normal raids. There's probably some fights you can do it with in normal raids, but it's still not going to be easy. And then savage raids 100% too. And then tank UCOB got cleared. So boom. The closest example is a clear in old content that has been content crept massively, UCOB, which is true, but ooh, technically worse. I only know that from doing the fights. Even in ultimate content, all we really have to do for the most part is pressing broil, which, okay, so someone got mad at me because of the fact that they cleared the 2 easiest ultimates, and then they asked me if I think that they have an opinion in saying this, and the answer is like simply yes. My issue, again, when we checked what content was cleared, like this, the striking healer is different from the person who made the post about the strike. Okay, so I can't comment on that. But if this person, for example, right, I don't know who they are, and that's not my person. I don't know. But if they it sounds like to me that they do ultimates, right? So, but also like how much? Okay, because like if you think that you can do UCOB and just press boil for the most part, that's that's very untrue. Like Scholar is actually extremely important in ultimates because of the ability to do spread low, especially if it crits. That's such a godsend of a button combo that is so loved by everybody in terms of ultimates that like you're going to be pressing buttons. I guess the problem is that they're just pressing one button because when the mob flies away, then applying a dot becomes a little useless because it doesn't do damage when they're away, right? So yeah, you might be pressing both for the most part. Um, but again, it also very much differentiates across the board for different jobs. Like in T and DSR, there's opportunities for you to press Art of War, which is not an argument that like I'm not saying that that just automatically clears that, but I'm saying is that like there are moments where you're not just pressing broil and then that's literally it, right? Like there are opportunities to press other buttons, but that requires you to actually solve that healer puzzle of figuring out how to maximize and optimize your damage as a healer in opportunities when it's available. Um, right? And I guess because you only press broil, it doesn't feel like that's possible. But in a realistic sense, like it is, right? But it just depends on how you kind of go about it. There just isn't enough damage to go around. Healers have nothing to heal due to low incoming damage in the current content and high sustain on other classes, most notably Warrior. Okay, so healers having nothing to heal due to low incoming damage in current content, that's it's going to depend on when you do the content. Like if right now, if you go and do Anabasios 9 through 12 and you have 660 augmented tome gear and the relic for Manderville, yeah, like things are not going to hit you that hard. But like if you go do P9 normal in at min eye level, like people died. One like melees and some casters and maybe even fizz range, some of them would just die because there wasn't a mitigation applied by the healers. Like that's why it's so important that if you're playing Scholar or Sage, like you pre-shield uh in preparation for the pull. Sometimes you literally have to crit spread low or Zoe your creation prognosis on the pull because the AoE that's incoming is extremely lethal if you don't. Like we need healers in our content, regardless of the difficulty. I guarantee you, when Dawntrail comes out and we get that first Arcadian one raid, whatever that it is, we're literally gonna run into a scenario where like someone's gonna be told like, "Oh, I don't gotta use shield; it doesn't matter," and then the boss will do an AOE, and then there's like a dead healer and a dead ranger, and then it's like, "Oh, I guess I should probably like mitigate that," and it's like, but it's not. But again, the other issue I guess you can argue in this example is that there's other jobs outside of healers that have ways to mitigate versus bosses. However, there's not a single healer in this game that has a debuff that reduces damage incoming, right? It's not like they don't have a reprisal. I guess like if you want to be able to create a harder scenario for healers is that you actually have to give them some form of a reprisal or like an addle, but they don't have that, right? Those are assigned to the tanks and the DPS because that's just it makes more sense to give them abilities that reduces damage on as a target to the boss than to give it to the party, right? The only rare case scenarios that you have that is with the Fizz range who have like Tactician, Curing Waltz, right? Um, and maybe even improvisation with like Dancer, or you have um like dissemble or the wrench thing with machinist, right? Like, but again, there's not many buttons that give mitigation or heals to the party outside of like you're not going to be able to sustain yourself if you had like 8 reapers all using arcane crest to mitigate and deal with recovery for an AoE. Like it's just not how that works. If you take 8 reapers and you use arcane crest against the ultima, that's the AoE that P10 has, the bleed will out tick eventually a good portion of those healer like those heals from the Reaper's crest move. So like it's really hard for you to tell me that healers have nothing to heal due to damage. But also again, UCOB, Uwu, and T were much more difficult when they came out on release. Obviously, the scaling as it increases with time gets worse because of the fact that the content's old. But if you go ask play, I didn't do UCUB and UU on patch release, so I don't have a clue, right? But it took 17 days to figure out how to actually clear um, UCOB when it first came out because that content was very difficult and it wasn't because of a lack of damage. Okay, so when we get content day one, healing is going to become a requirement to figure out how to optimize. Figuring out how to optimize like what shields to use and when to use it so that you can maximize your damage efficiency and also like reduce the necessity of recovery after an attack for the healers to have. That's something that's part of the strategy of playing healer. Like, you know what I mean? So that's just kind of what it boils down to. And again, I think the issue too is that they're talking specifically about warrior, right? This rule doesn't easily apply to Gunbreaker, Dark Knight, or Paladin in the same level. Like I personally, I like doing dungeons with warrior because of that self sustainability. Whether I have a healer or not, it doesn't matter. The point is that if I was with friends and I go, we do 3-1 and I'm playing tank, I'm gonna go warrior because it's just easy for me to maintain my own personal sustainability by survivability, right? But if I go Dark Knight, then I have to use buttons that I normally may not have to use as a warrior. So if you want to have a different argument, you can argue that warrior is too strong in dungeons, but that's counterintuitive because warrior is actually not as strong in comparison in harder level content than the other tanks, right? Like warrior, it doesn't suck for mitigation in comparison to other tanks in like Savage and Ultimates, but there is attacks that happen in Ultimates, like the current ones with like DSR on top, where like the warrior needs help despite their mitigation. They all have similar mitigation, and for some reason still the warrior needs assistance with using a button that like a Dark Knight doesn't have to use, or that a Gunbreaker doesn't have to use, or a Paladin, right? So the issue is that the fact that the warrior is really easy to sustain and that only applies in dungeons. But in an ultimate and a savage case scenario, warrior is not the best mitigated tank in terms of if you don't include the invuln. Without invuln, warrior is probably the weakest, but with invuln, warrior is extraordinarily powerful because the invuln time is so low compared to other tanks. But at the same time, when we also do in downtime is DPS, and 95% of our time is now downtime, that means all we can do is press one damage button. So again, I think that's what it boils down to. If you do a raid and you have 8 players that all have max item level gear, then an AoE isn't going to do a lot of damage. A tank buster too. Like you take maybe like 55% if you eat a tank buster raw as a tank because you have max item level and the content's so old. It gets even worse if you do the first raid. Go do Ericthonios and then eat the heavy hand tank buster as a tank at 660 item level. That damage doesn't do anything. And the AoE, same thing. But the thing is that like it was a different time when that fight first came out. That fight was way harder at normal level. So I think it's hard to say that, but then you're doing the content as it is right now. Dawntrail, you're gonna realize it when Dawntrail comes out and we get the new raids. We're gonna be so happy that we have healers. It'll be the same thing applied in trials and dungeons too. That's not even a discussion. Like we're gonna love our healers when they come into the game and they actually start doing stuff that we need them to do that involve healing. And again, they're going to have to figure out how to add an extra button or two of damage in between all of that as well. So, not to mention, healers are getting like giga buffed in terms of mitigation, and they have swift cast at 40 seconds. That's not because of dungeon. It's not for dungeon content. Like that's not what it boils down to, right? So, and on top of that, all the content was also less stressful in Endwalker, and they're taking that off and they're making it more stressful in Dawntrail. So again, it's hard for us to assume anything about what he did in that dungeon because we just don't have a clue until we actually get our hands on it ourselves. I will probably struggle with that dungeon as a tank player. Like, I'm not going to know the mechanics and functionality. I might end up dying. I'll let you know if anything. But, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go in and do the dungeon with 3 DPS as a tank. I'm not doing that. I personally like having my healer because I rely on my healer as a tank player because that's how the game is naturally meant to be played. We naturally need healers in this game. Some people who are far skilled than I am, they say a question. They're like, "Hey, can we do without a healer? Let's find out." And they didn't clear top in a single day with 3 tanks and 5 DPS. It probably took them weeks, if anything. So I think you really got to put it into perspective the importance of healers. The problem is that right now the idea of how strong healers are because of gear in comparison to current content, it may not seem that way. Um, Checking parsers of Gemini is pointless. You don't need to only do high tier endgame rating to have an opinion on state of healing. So okay, so what I probably said at the end of the video is like, if you don't do the content, then you kind of can't talk about the content if you don't do it. Okay, I still to a degree feel that way. Like I'm not going to have an opinion about Eden Ultimate when it comes out until I do it. Like I'm not allowed to have an. I mean, not that I'm not allowed, but I'm gonna have an opinion, but it's gonna be a bad take because I'm not gonna say like, oh, that mechanic looks easy. If I haven't done it yet. Okay, and again, I haven't looked at Xenos' attempt at the dungeon, and apparently to what the striker healer had said here do, he played like dog water. So if he played like dog water, like imagine when he plays well, it's gonna be much more mentally manageable. But like, and yes, you're gonna be like, oh well, then you just prove my point because it means that we don't need healers. No, that's not how that works. Like, we're gonna need to have to play smart and well in terms of that future content that we're gonna be seeing. Like, it's not gonna. It's just because he did one dungeon, he's been playing the game for years. He's a warrior main. He's been a warrior main for 10 plus years. That doesn't imply like that healers are trash. He's not going to go into Arcadian Savage without a healer. And if he does, he's doing it to prove a point. If his static decides, hey, we're going to run two tanks and 60 PS just to kind of spite you guys, that's how you know that healers are like an issue. But if they don't do that to spite you, then that's not an argument. Like, healers are going to be a necessity in Savage raids. In Ultimate, it's 100% going to be a requirement. They prove this with DSR. Maybe top not so much, but the thing is that like in standard composition, without two healers in top is extremely difficult to do without healers. Like, only one run I've seen in the entire internet has showcased that you can possibly do it, but like, you're not going to see people run the same composition to do that top run without healers. Like, so, and again, like I said, Party Finder, I run Party Finder. All my clears have been through Party Finder. I've never seen a situation where I couldn't do top without healers. Never. It's always required two healers, and that just makes sense. Um, Gemini not doing higher end game content, it doesn't matter the number. It matters that they actually did the content. Because what I don't want to hear is someone say that UCOB or Uwu or T is easy because like healer is too strong or tanks is too strong, right? And that they're like not necessary. But like, again, if you go into Party Finder, you'll never see an opportunity where people actually try and do that content without healers. They don't do that in Party Finder. It's always a requirement. So, but like, if you think that healing in UCOB is pointless, but you've never healed UCOB, I don't know how you can argue to me that that's something that you can say like to the masses, right? Like, if you've never healed any of the fights that you think are not required in the fight, like, then you should go do the fight and like see for yourself that a healer isn't required. And if you can clear the fight, then congratulations. Again, no one's going to come after you because you did that. Like, people didn't get mad at the top healer group for clearing it without a healer. People are not getting mad at people for causing this strike to the same degree. Like, we're not getting mad at you. We just think that the strike is stupid. If any, and I have an idea in my mind about it, and I'll talk about it later. Okay. Tanks and DPS aren't only fun in Savage Plus. Healers shouldn't be relegated to only being able to play their role in endgame rating either. To say otherwise is just gatekeeping content. The thing is that we don't gatekeep anybody. If anybody unlocks the raid, you can go do the raid. If anything, we welcome people to try and do the content because the content is so fun when you play whatever job that you're playing as a main. Like, if you want to play healer, tank, or DPS, like, please do. We actually welcome you, and we're happy to help you with anything. And I've played every possible role that I could in every ultimate that I've actually attempted, and I understand the necessity of a healer in ultimate even to this day, such as Uwu. Like, I played Scholar and Uwu, got to Titan, having never practiced the fight at all as a healer. I just mechanically knew where healers go, and guess what? I sat there spamming most of my heal buttons because I didn't know how to optimize Scholar. Once I got used to figuring out, oh, I can just press this button and people will live, then all of a sudden I was making space for damage. And I didn't just spam broil. I actually pressed a bunch of different buttons. So we're not gatekeeping healers or people from playing the video game or doing the content. It's just that, like, you can't come into the room assuming that you as a healer are not needed in the content. We're gonna need you at some point. And also, we don't care about the little number. We care that you can do it. Anybody will tell you that, like, if you, I'd rather get 20 clears of an ultimate and have a 7 than to have one clear and have like a 94. Don't care. Like, I'd rather get the 20 versus the 1 any day. Also, the more often you play in an ultimate, the more likely you should improve with time because you're getting comfortable doing the ultimate or the savage raid or the trial or the dungeon. All those rules fall into the same place regardless. So the vast majority of content run on the daily will be casual content because since everyone does roulette daily for tombstone farming. I mean, yeah, but like no one's gonna do an ultimate for tombstones, you know what I mean? And yes, like it's end game concept, but like you can get tombstones from ultimates, but like no one farms ultimates for that, right? You farm ultimate for the shiny weapon in the title. Um Now I think the point here is that casual content is currently looking easy enough that a healer is not required, and I think that's the issue. I think they want casual content to pose a challenge just enough that a healer becomes a necessity versus people being just able to do it without one. But I don't think that's ever going to be possible. You're going to always run into scenarios where if you gatekeep the opportunity for someone to do something that's unique to the game, that's worse than feeling that we're gatekeeping content from players because they are, because they're healing. Like, that's not how that works. If you tell me that I'm not allowed to run a dungeon with a tank and 3 DPS, that's worse than if I can't just do it in general, like in Criterion, that's not how that works. You're required to run a healer in Criterion along with a tank and a DPS. That's just literally how it works. So if you tell me that I can't do that with a dungeon, then or like an Unreal, then I mean it's already bad enough that it is finding people to play certain roles. Finding tanks and healers in this game is extremely difficult. So if I was required to play a tank, but I wanted to play like a DPS, then you know what I mean? So we don't want to gatekeep anybody from playing the game since it's accessible to everyone and anyone. Anybody can buy the game tomorrow and buy a skip, speed run through the story, unlock top, and go clear it. You can easily go do that. Because the resources are available, right? That we have the guides, we have the skips, you have the time to speed run through it. You can skip cutscenes and just go do ultimates. People do that all the time. So if you feel our points are irrelevant, I highly encourage you to try out Healer for Dawn Trail. I do recognize that calling it a strike might have not been the best idea, but at least now we're heard. Okay, so the reason why I think it is irrelevant is pretty much summed up what I've been saying for the past like 40 minutes, right? It's the fact that healers are like, we saw one person take 3 friends, do one content that is usually deemed not difficult without a healer. And I think that's literally the issue. And I do agree, calling it a strike might have not been the best idea. What I would have, okay, and here's the thing that I don't know, right? Because I'm not part of the community that tries to argue about anything. I love this game as it is, no matter what form it turns into. I've been playing this game since 2015, and I've never had a complaint about this game, despite all the issues that people complain about with the game. Whatever people find to be an issue, I don't think about that issue. I'm very biased about how passionately I love this game. I've been playing it for like literally almost 10 years straight. Like, like when they changed my job, like they changed Paladin, I was upset that they changed Paladin, but I still looked at the positive of the fact that Paladin is different and it blends in with the rest of the tanks. Obviously, it being like a sustainable damage tank is different than it being like a burst tank now, right? And some people might argue that it's an issue that they're kind of homogenous in that regard. But the thing is that I'm not pressing the same buttons in the same order in the same way with every single tank in the same time. Like, right? Would I like there to be a difference? Yes. I mean, I've not complained, but I have noticed that, like, with Dark Knight versus Warrior, Delirium and Inner Release have been the same button for years, right? And so the feeling of playing Dark Knight and Warrior feel the exact same, except Warrior has less buttons to press, and also big axe versus big sword. That's right. But the thing is, like, I still play both jobs and I still love playing both jobs despite the similarity seeming so similar. Okay. Um, I don't know if a petition has ever been utilized in an opportunity to express some concerns. If you called it a petition, then I don't think people would be annoyed by people creating a strike. I think a petition, but again, if a petition doesn't work because it hasn't worked in the past, then I understand why you're trying a different approach and creating a strike instead. But I think that a strike is a negative impression because the affectation of a strike is going to apply to other players who are unaware of the strike. Whereas a petition, you can volunteer people who are interested in signing said petition and addressing it to Square Enix. But if you're causing a strike, you're affecting people's uh ability to do the content. So if, like I said, if we don't have healers because this strike is an issue, then that's going to be really obnoxious. But if a petition wasn't signed by enough people to warrant a response from Square Enix, but you're at least creating a petition that doesn't harm people and prevent them from being able to interact with the game that involve healers. Okay, so I will happily agree with you that the word strike is probably the wrong word, and in my personal opinion, Gemini should change it to a petition if it hasn't been one already. A petition is much more logical versus a strike, because you're negatively impacting me in my game in the future if I don't get healers, right? And I don't know if I do. Like, I don't know how many people have signed this thing or are on the strike, but like there's 30 million people. If you somehow get a million people out of 30 million, that's a pretty big dent in comparison to like 150 versus 30 million, right? I don't know how many there are. I'm assuming it's like a couple hundred something. So I'll take the meme on over being ignored for a third expansion in a row. I would also like to ask you, as I do anyone with a different opinion, what should we have done? See, and this is the reason why I commend the striking healer here, and I appreciate them giving me all this context about how they feel about what's going on. Here's what I think that they should have done. Personally, before we even talk about that, okay? First and foremost, Yoshi P has already addressed several issues that he has felt with the current format of the game that they're going to be addressing starting in 7.2 of Dawn Trail. Like expansion, Dawn Trail patch 2, whatever, they're already going to start experimenting with things to remove the homogenization that the jobs all have. That includes tanks, healers, and DPSs. He's not somebody who thinks that all the jobs are perfectly played either. Remember, Astro's gotten reworked like every expansion since Stormblood, right? They made changes in Stormblood, they reworked it in Shadowbringers, they reworked it in Endwalker, they're reworking it again in Dawn Trail. Like Astro is not a perfect job because of the fact it's been changed every expansion. Okay, so all of the jobs are entering this world where they need that separation. Now, is damage buttons going to create that separation? Right, we don't really know, but I would have I would have used the knowledge, knowing that that the changes are coming in the very distant future, because like the assumption that's created right now by Yoshi P is that 8.0, where like all the jobs, I mean, in theory, right, it hasn't been confirmed obviously because we're not even there yet, but every single job in preparation for 8.0, in theory, every job is getting reworked to change that homogenization. That's the idea behind it. Now, will they actually do that? Right, we have no idea, but if they do, here's my issue. If they do that, right, I'm going to miss the way how every job has been played since I've been playing it in Dawn Trail. And it's not because it's going to be better or worse. It's just that it's going to be different. Like, I love, despite people like disliking Astro, for example, okay, I love Astro in Shadowbringers. I loved it in Endwalker, and I loved it in Stormblood. They all play differently, right? But the thing is that I miss the old variations of how jobs used to function. I miss when tanks had two stances. You had an offensive stance and a defensive stance. I miss when we had roll abilities with protect, and even though people didn't like it, I miss it because we don't have it anymore, and there wasn't something to like replace it. You know what I mean? So what I would have done is just create ideas, because the thing is, like, the development team listens to people in the forums very frequently. They've taken things that were not originally in the game that people were using, and they started putting it in the game. So whatever method that they do that with, I would incorporate that as your strategy to give people an idea on the development side how to make healers better to your personal liking. So, like, for example, if like if white mage has a glare button and a dot, and if, I mean, you can't do it without affecting the code, right? But if there was some way to like create another attack that is used in some other format. It's hard to do that though, because like you can't do that without breaking the game and then getting caught for it, right? Um, but like long story short, whatever methods that people use to showcase like quality of life things in the game that Square takes from those people and they put in the game, I would just talk to those people and work with them to figure out what is their strategy and their method of creating quality of life changes, even if it's just graphical, um, that eventually gets imported into 14 at the base kit level. Like I don't use any of those things to like I have no idea. Right. So for me, it's simple to just like use whatever the game gives me. So I mean, I'm only like I'm not even immersed in it at all. I have no idea. But I would talk to those people. That's the first thing I would do. Um, Second thing I would have done is, well, I would before you make it worse, because I do believe if you keep on doing this preparation of a strike in the release of Dawntrail, um, I wouldn't I wouldn't continue the strike. I would just stop the strike altogether. I think it's more important that you just use social media as a platform, because the thing is like you never know when somebody is going to talk to you or reach out to you about something of the nature, or you get noticed. People who create the attention, eventually they get noticed. Obviously it takes a little bit of fishing to kind of reel the fish in, but it eventually happens. So I think like conceptually theorizing ideas, I know it sounds all like like rainbows and butterflies and sunshine, of like what could be but never will be, because you've been waiting 5 years. Like I'm sorry you've been waiting 5 years to get change that you've been wanting in this game for the healer perspective that you have not yet received. Because personally for me, I thought that like just getting a fourth healer was incredible, that I was like, oh my god, there's four healers, that's awesome, right? We had three. I loved when we had three, and then you can change between diurnal and neutral for Astro, and then they just took out neutral, and then you or nocturnal, and you just have like the natural diurnal, right? Like I think that it's really cool that we have healers, and we're going to be getting more healers in the future, and hopefully they figure out a way to like divide that, right? So again, just use social media as a platform to just really let people let to hear opinions. That's why we're having this. That's why we're having a conversation right now, right? Y'all listen to my opinion about how I feel about the healer strike and how much I don't like it because of how you guys are going about it, and now we're having a conversation on the internet that this video might garner some form of attention somewhere, and then that's how you spread the word, right? Spreading the word is what's necessary to enable things to get done. Now, again, y'all been waiting for 5 years, so I'm sorry it's taken so long. I mean, I could have been waiting years even with that too for getting changes for Tank, right? But the thing is, like, the difference between you and I is that I'm not someone who instantly gets frustrated with changes about things. Like I'm like a go with the flow kind of guy. Like if you don't like healer changes, that's your opinion. You're allowed to feel that way, and that's perfectly logical and fine. And I don't have an issue with that. But like if they changed Gunbreaker, which is my main, entirely 180 the heck out of Gunbreaker, I'm not gonna get mad about it. I'm just gonna just deal with it. That's just how I naturally am when it comes to like function and flow of doing things. Like I'm gonna just learn new Gunbreaker, despite them changing how I've been doing the job for almost 5 years, right? So there's that. Knowing that we tried to discuss this in the healer forum, sorry, I said harder, in the healer forums before and have been ignored for 5 years, that we are quitting healing out of finding it no longer fun to play and picking up the other roles, what would be the correct avenue to take our grievances? I mean, I don't think you're wrong for going in the forums for addressing it. The thing is, like, I think if you approach it in like a negative connotation, it's going to be received negatively. Like I said, that's why we're having these videos, right? Um, Look, people don't like my opinion about what I said about the healer strike because I negatively reacted to your negative imprint on my idea of the game about healers, and you said that you're causing a strike, which is in my consciousness like ruining my fun for playing healer, right? I don't want to have to play healer this expansion because there's no healers. Like that's not something that I want to do. I want to be able to see people thrive on the idea that healer is fun to play, and I don't want to have to like play tank and then clear content as tank and then clear content as healer just to prove to you that healer. I don't want to do that because I just feel that's really rude and disrespectful. um so like look, there's a lot of content creators out there who play healer. There's a lot of them that are very big name, right? You got Xenos, you got Happy, you got Mistech, you got Arthur's, right? You got Whoops, Wonderful, The list is extensive on people that exist for just talk to them. Like, look, Xenos, whenever they do the races and for like the ultimates, they also address the issues that they feel exist in the game. And guess what? Yo, the developers listen to the content creators. They listen to Midna and Unileska's on the main page for Dawn Trail. I don't even know if she plays Dawn Trail like 14 like that. I think she just like loves Final Fantasy, right? So she's just everything Final Fantasy, and I love her for that because I'm in the same boat. But like she was literally selected to do the unboxing for Dawn Trail's Collector's Edition, and that's because of her passionate love for Final Fantasy. If you passionately hate Final Fantasy, like you might not end up on the page. You know what I mean? So positive insight, I think, is the move that you might have wanted to go into, despite your grievances. Like again, I think people eventually listen. If you go into like Happy or Xenos or any of those content creators and just talk to them about what their opinions are, what your thoughts are, they might take your thought and opinion and turn it into a video, which is again exactly what I'm doing here. I took your comments and we have ourselves an hour discussion about what you said, what I said, and how we both feel about what's happening. So like I really want you guys to just rethink the idea behind creating a strike that's going to negatively imprint people, because the worst thing you can possibly do is go on this strike and then people start playing other games despite how much they love 14, and then newsflash, there's no more 14, right? Then we got to go find another game to play. And if you somehow did that to me, then I would be very, very mad, because I want this game to last as long as it's intended to by the development side. I don't want some person to ruin it because they're mad about one thing in the game that they don't like. You know what I mean? Everyone's allowed to be mad about things because they want it to be better. The way that you go about it, though, it really depends on how you go about it. That's just the truth to that situation as it boils down to. Because, I mean, Xenos is a prime example too. He complains about things that suck for tanks. He hates how Gunbreaker functions. He hates that there was a bug in the ultimate for Omega. And like, look, they actually took the time out of their day to actually go address and look at those issues, and then bada bing, bada boom. Now, obviously, becoming a content creator is very difficult because you start at zero and you got to make your way up to the top. But sometimes you can use the people that are already up there and have them address some of the concerns that are there. So I would say just go do that. And look, if it makes you feel any better as well, if I somehow became someone who was a part of the content creator world where Square Enix listens to me, then like I would create content that implies what you guys feel. Like I'm not somebody who's like I'm not like a negative thought person when like I love this game with all my heart. I play every job. I have many characters that like have all the jobs maxed out. I love this game more than a lot of people. And that's not to flex nothing. I'm just letting you know that like I love this game a lot, and I strive to be able to become a person that can become like, a stain on the map of 14's creators. I would love that, because then I can take your thoughts about healer and actually turn it into something that might give them some feedback to think about for the sake of healing. So you got to boost up yourself and people despite the grievances, but eventually there's always like sunshine at the end of the road. I know it was like very poetic, but like that's just the truth. That's the honest truth. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'm sorry that it seemed like such a negative impression, but again, negative attracts negative despite them being the same. It's not like opposites attract like magnets. It's like you only further garner negativity by causing it, right? So people are going to get mad at you for causing a healer strike. Just don't do that to people. Like, do something that will make people actually want to join you. Don't have people like, don't become the enemy, right? Become the friend. That's just the simplest way I can put it to you. So that's all that there's for me. Um, Again, I'm more than happy to have the conversation and we can try to address things together, but we got to do it together. We can't be on opposite sides doing it. I just feel like that's not how that's supposed to work. So I really hope that I hope that whatever your wishes are for healer, I hope that you get them and they become a positive impact on me playing healer. So that's just the simple answer to that one. Take care.